What if I told you that in the middle of the 20th century, long after gas chambers and electric chairs had taken center stage, American soldiers were still marched before a wall, blindfolded and gunned down by their own comrades? The last U.S. soldier executed this way died not in some distant Civil War skirmish, but beneath a slate-gray sky in January 1945. Vosges Mountains, eastern France. The snow crunches under heavy boots. A 24-year-old private, Eddie Slovic, shivers in a thin GI blanket, insignia stripped from his uniform. 12 rifles glint in weak winter light. 11 hold live rounds. 1 holds a blank, so no shooter can swear he fired the fatal shot. A chaplain murmurs a final prayer. "Okay, Father," Slovic whispers back. "I'll pray you don't follow me too soon." A black hood slips over his eyes. Ready. Aim. The volley cracks like a single monstrous heartbeat, ricocheting off the courtyard wall and echoing through the valley. Slovic's body slumps, web belt sagging. A medic steps forward, counts the wounds, neck, chest, shoulder, heart, pronounces him dead. His crime, desertion. His punishment, death by firing squad, the first such army execution since the Civil War, and the last to this day. We often think of firing squads as something from old Wild West stories or cruel foreign leaders, but the U.S. military has also used this method from the Revolution through World War II for mutiny, murder, rape, and, in Slovic's case, simply walking away from war. Behind each crisp command, ready, aim, fire, lies a calculated ritual, anonymity for shooters, certainty for the condemned, and a message to every uniform in earshot that betrayal meets cold steel, not courtroom appeals. You think the noose and the needle were brutal? Wait until you feel the ground tremble beneath 12 synchronized rifles. As you watch, ask yourself, could you pull the trigger if ordered? Would you hope the blank was in your rifle or the live round? Tell us in the comments and stay tuned. Around the 4-minute mark, we'll dive into a quick Q&A break to hear your thoughts. From revolution to redcoats, the birth of American firing squads. New Jersey, 1778. A row of men stand rigid in the bitter wind. In front of them, Private Thomas Hickey kneels, bound and silent. He's been convicted of mutiny and of plotting to assassinate George Washington, a plot uncovered just days earlier. Thousands of Continental soldiers look on as the order is given. A shot rings out. The man who once wore the same uniform falls forward, lifeless. It is the first known execution by firing squad in American military history. In the fragile years of the American Revolution, discipline was survival. George Washington, fearful of insubordination and British sympathizers, insisted on strict military justice. According to Article 18 of the 1775 Rules and Articles of War, soldiers guilty of treason, desertion, or mutiny could be punished by death. But how is that death administered? The musket. Why? Because in battle, the gun was the soldier's code. A firing squad was not just a method, it was a message. Execution by firing squad was seen, oddly, as a more honorable death than hanging. To shoot a man was to kill him as a soldier. To hang him was to treat him like a criminal. The difference mattered, especially to those facing their final moments. Even in disgrace, soldiers often begged to face the rifles, not the rope. Let's break down why firing squads became the go-to for military justice. Anonymity. Only one rifle is loaded with a blank. Each shooter can believe they didn't fire the fatal shot. Speed. A well-trained squad can end a life in less than a second. Message. Unlike private executions, these were often public. staged to instill fear, discipline, and obedience in the ranks. Between 1861 and 1865, over 250 Union soldiers were executed by firing squad. Their crimes ranged from murder and rape to desertion and cowardice under fire. One of the most famous cases, William Johnson, a black Union soldier executed in 1864 for deserting his post, an act that many historians now argue was driven more by racism than justice. His death was ordered not in a courtroom, but by a commander who needed an example. You've probably heard of soldiers dying in combat, but did you know they were sometimes killed by their own side? How would you react if you were in the crowd watching your comrade fall? Let us know below. And if you've made it this far, don't forget, like, subscribe, and hit the bell icon. We've got more shocking truths to uncover. Perfect. Let's march forward into the frozen hills of eastern France, where one terrified young man became the only U.S. soldier executed for desertion since the Civil War. Desertion and duty, the execution of Private Eddie Slovik. Vosges Mountains, France, January 31st, 1945. The snow falls like ash. A U.S. Army medic adjusts his coat. 12 soldiers in clean-pressed uniforms raise their M1 Garands. Just 20 feet away, Private Eddie Slovik, only 24 years old, waits with his arms and legs bound to a post. A black hood is placed over his head. The order is called. Ready, aim. The wind holds its breath. Fire! 12 rounds explode in unison. Eddie jerks, slumps forward, lifeless. The snow soaks in his blood. Who was Eddie Slovik? Eddie wasn't a killer. He wasn't a traitor. He was a Detroit kid, a former convict for petty theft, drafted late into the war. Unlike most draftees, he openly admitted he was afraid. After enduring relentless shell fire and chaos in France, Slovik became separated from his unit. When reunited days later, he handed his commanding officer a written confession. "I'm so scared, I just can't kill anyone." He begged to be arrested, to be jailed, not sent to the front. He believed honesty would earn leniency. He was wrong. Slovik's trial lasted just a few hours. He had no legal representation experienced in capital cases. No witnesses were called in his defense. He refused to recant his confession, believing the military would imprison him instead of executing him. But by late 1944, the Allies were desperate. Desertions were increasing. Commanders feared a breakdown in discipline. General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself approved Slovik's execution to set an example. Slovik wasn't the only deserter. Over 20,000 U.S. soldiers were tried for desertion during World War II. 49 were sentenced to death, but only one, Slovik, was actually executed. Why? Because he made himself too visible, too defiant. He put it in writing. He asked to be jailed. To military brass, this was an opportunity to send a message. This is what happens when you walk away. His death wasn't justice. It was psychological warfare against his fellow troops. If you're finding this story intriguing, let us know your thoughts below. Would you have pulled the trigger on Eddie Slovik if you were one of the riflemen? And if you haven't already, subscribe for more stories like this, where forgotten history collides with the uncomfortable present. Slovik was buried in an unmarked grave in a French military prison yard. His widow, Antoinette, spent 3 decades fighting for his remains to be returned home. Only in 1987, with help from journalist William Bradford Huey, was Eddie reburied in Michigan with full military honors. But the stain remains. Was Slovik a coward? Or the victim of a machine that needed a body to keep its ranks in line? What would you do if you were that scared? If you were ordered to kill someone who simply didn't want to die or kill? Are you still sure you know what justice looks like? Behind the rifles, the burden of the executioner. French countryside, 1945. 12 soldiers stand in formation. Their orders: shoot to kill. One of them, Private James, clutches his rifle so tightly his knuckles go white. His stomach churns. He doesn't know if he has a blank or a live round. They were told it wouldn't take more than a second. That the man tied to the post, Private Eddie Slovic, was a coward, a traitor. But now, at 20 feet, with the hood slipping over Eddie's face, James sees something else. A man, a boy, a mirror. The U.S. military developed a precise procedure for firing squads: 12 soldiers, 11 rifles loaded with live ammunition, 1 rifle with a blank round. Each man fires simultaneously, none knowing if his shot was the one that killed. It's meant to diffuse responsibility, to offer a sliver of psychological refuge. Maybe I didn't fire the killing shot. But as we've learned from first-hand accounts, the weight doesn't vanish. Most executioners never spoke of what they did, not to their wives, not to their children, not even to each other. Some began drinking. Others suffered from nightmares years after the war ended. One anonymous Slovak rifleman told a military chaplain, "Every time I close my eyes, I see him. Not the shot, his face before it." In military archives and oral history projects, a recurring theme appears. The shooters weren't volunteers. They were chosen at random or ordered without question. Some tried to be reassigned or begged out. Most were denied. Moral injury, a psychological wound caused by violating one's own ethical code, has since been linked to many who served on these squads. And the Army? They offered no counseling. Once the shots were fired, the men were expected to move on, as if nothing had happened. Imagine being one of those soldiers, holding a gun, knowing the man tied up in front of you wears the same uniform, that he ate the same rations, walked through the same mud, and now you're being told, end his life. Even today, military firing squads haven't disappeared. In fact, states like Utah have reintroduced the firing squad as an option for execution, citing issues with lethal injection protocols. But what hasn't changed is that someone has to pull the trigger. Someone has to live with it. Perfect. Let's step into the shadows of America's modern justice system, where high-tech executions have failed and a centuries-old method has returned from the dead. A bullet in the dark, the return of the firing squad. Draper, Utah, 2010. A man strapped to a chair, a black hood pulled tight over his face. 5 law enforcement officers stand behind a cinder-block wall, rifles aimed through slits in a black curtain. A command is whispered: "Fire!" The echo of gunfire rolls like thunder through the execution chamber. The target, Ronnie Lee Gardner, a convicted double murderer. The method, firing squad. The state, Utah, 21st century America. After decades of dormancy, Utah brought back the firing squad in 2015, making it legal again when lethal injection drugs became scarce. Why? Because despite being the most visually violent method, the firing squad was seen by some as fast, accurate, less prone to error. The irony. A method many see as medieval is now being argued as more humane than the lethal injection. In the early 2000s, pharmaceutical companies, many based in Europe, began refusing to sell drugs for American executions. The result? Botched injections. Inmates writhing in pain, prolonged deaths, lawsuits. By contrast, a firing squad, when executed properly, kills instantly with bullets to the heart. It avoids questions of poison and pain. It avoids the slow death that some believe injection brings. But it doesn't avoid the trauma of watching a man get torn apart by bullets. To some, it's justice. To others, it's state-sponsored barbarism. Polls show that a surprising number of Americans support the firing squad over lethal injection, especially in states like Utah, Oklahoma, and Mississippi, where it's still on the books. But support often fades when people see what it really looks like. Blood, convulsions, the violence of it all. Unlike the sterile quiet of an injection, the firing squad doesn't let you look away. It's almost poetic. The same method used on Private Eddie Slovic in World War II, meant to send a message to soldiers, is now sending a message to the public. We can't get the drugs, but we can still kill you. Legal scholars argue this is a constitutional loophole, and some death row inmates have chosen the firing squad themselves. Not because they're morbid, because they fear suffocation, not bullets. What do you think? If you had to choose lethal injection or a firing squad, what would you pick? Does one feel more humane to you? Or is death simply death? Comment below. And if you're learning something new, hit that like button and share this with someone who thinks they know how justice works in America. There are no easy answers here. The firing squad is ancient, it's brutal, it's visceral. But maybe it's the honesty of it that unsettles us. There's no pretending the state isn't taking a life, no hiding behind syringes or veils. And in a system full of broken machinery, maybe the firing squad was never the most terrifying method. Maybe it was the most honest. Thank you for watching this deep dive into one of the most haunting punishments in military and American legal history. If this story made you think, hit the thumbs up, subscribe for more untold histories, and leave your thoughts in the comments. We rid to everyone. Until next time. Stay curious, stay questioning, and never forget the weight of pulling the trigger.